Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Jamie Mathias, Executive Director of MASBA, the Mexican American School Boards Association. We are in the middle of our webinar series celebrating our Golden Jubilee, our 50th anniversary here at MASBA, the Mexican American School Boards Association. We have two dear friends of MASBA here with us today, retired Lieutenant Colonel Consuelo Castillo Kickbush of Educational Achievement Services and Roy Juarez Jr. of Impact Truth. Consuelo and Roy, welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Good to see. Glad to have you all back. Glad to have you here because we're continuing our exploration of the 4 steps to courageous leadership. This is part 2 of our series. Jump into this and tell us, what do we need to know? We're excited to have you here during these pandemic times, helping us through this and giving us some ideas as superintendents and trustees for things that we should know and things that we might do.
Well, thank you for having us back. We truly appreciate it.
We're excited. We decided that we would like to just do a little recap because maybe, you know, some of our brothers and sisters were not able to join us, but we want to again thank every school board member, every educator, every listener, every superintendent, teacher, everyone, parent that's with us this morning. Roy and I decided to put together an ebook and through the lens of leadership, and these are times in which truly courage has to emerge. So in our last webinar, we talked about 2 main points. We talked about staying human, that when we're now realizing we're in these very close quarters, it's about looking inside, looking at what we can do within ourselves. So one of the questions that we asked were, where are you finding your strength? In other words, look at a positive instead of the negative. As we go back, we spoke about what would our parents, our abuelos, our tíos, what would they have done faced with something like this pandemic? Although they also, we can say, faced many, many, many challenges. Many of our ancestors we know are of immigrant background. They're migrant, and still our familias are migrant. They're still going back and forth. And so the question was, what in your journey do you remember your roots? And sometimes leadership, we need to just be still in order to not just be so impulsive. And the last point we talked about under the first step was humble leadership. And that's to recognize that everyone has value. We've just heard some wonderful stories from Jamie about smaller communities coming together, about school board members thinking totally out of the box, but never losing their humanity, never losing why we are doing what we're doing, and that's for the children and their families. Also, we realize that in staying human, we have to also have empathy and compassion for our teachers who are doing multiple duties at the same time. That it's not about the blame game, that it's about collaboration. And so that was just a highlight, kind of the helicopter view. And Roy, I'd like for you to share.
Yeah, for sure. And then that was a perfect lead-in, man, because for step 2, we talked about that it's going to be okay. And we broke that down in several ways. And 3 that really stick out is the fact that we leverage your talents. Everyone has a talent. Everyone has gifts. And if we can all work together and share those, then we can make it through this together. And that's in every aspect when it comes from your career, working with students, in the home. We also talked about that there's 2 different types of people. Those that are living and those that exist. Moving towards the living part of during these times, creating those memories, using those gifts, once again, your talents to continue to use this time to reflect and move forward as a unit and with your team. And then finally, that life is a gift, that when everything comes down on you or when you're feeling that cabin fever, really take a step back and think, you know what, I still have life. Everything else is negotiable. I can keep going from here. And it's okay to take a time out. That's another thing we talked about, that it's gonna be okay. It's okay to take a time out because even in my household, every single one of us has felt this feeling of being cooped up or not knowing what's gonna come. Fear is a normal feeling, but we can react to it by going back to our ancestors and what they've done, going back to the experiences that we had, like you shared, man, when it comes to staying human and understanding that everything is going to be okay.
Absolutely. Well, this became a overnight sensation. We've heard Nopalitos was a perspective that we put together about courageous leadership, and we've had so many comments and affirmations that we had to put them back again. And if you haven't had breakfast, well, it's okay. It's okay to wonder a little bit about the Nopalitos.
It's just a breakdown of this thought of what we can do during this time. For example, and never give up on our kids, because our kids are priceless. Never give up. And that's step one.
The O is for look for the unforeseen opportunities, and some of the training, you look at the strength and the weaknesses, the opportunities and the threats. It's just the SWOT analysis. But look for, like we just heard from one of the success stories, of finding the tower and finding a way to give the internet access.
And it would also be about P, plan and prepare. We don't just have to react. We can also start planning out what's going to come 3 months from now. How is this pandemic going to change the way we operate in this world today, or how we're going to do our job? We can plan and prepare for that.
The A is for actions create legacy. And the thought that comes to mind is living a legacy, so that your legacy, when your time comes, when whatever our commitments are, that we realize that we were doing something today to prepare tomorrow's leaders.
And that's also the way leading with courageous leadership, leading us to the L, is it's about doing what's right, even if it's not what's most popular.
So I, being innovation and inspiration, will get you there. We talked about it earlier. You know, think about what hasn't been done, but it's in you, in your imagination, in your innovation.
And T is for teamwork, because it's going to take all of us. And one thing that I love about the ebook that we're coming out with this week is it talks about the different generations and how we have to work together, because the younger generation has this knowledge when it comes to technology, but our older generation has the wisdom. And if we can bring it all together, kind of like we do with Nopalitos, when we make that breakfast, that's when it becomes something good.
And we actually are going to be showing a video later on, right, Roy, that really tells the story through a humorous lens. And that is the point of O, observe with a different lens and look at how the different generations do communicate.
And finally, S, stay humble and serve with a big heart. And when we talk about being humble, we're not talking about not recognizing your own talents, but humble enough to not only recognize your own, but recognize the talents of everyone else around you and make room for everyone.
So that leads us wonderfully into what we call now our step 3. In our ebook, we talked about the fact that there's going to be some challenges, and courageous leaders, one of the steps of great courage in a leader is to recognize your vulnerability. And also in the minimizing your stress, we want to talk about maximizing your joy. So when you go towards the joy perspective, we love to hear from some of our members to share back. What are you grateful for? What is the blessing that you gained from being under these moments of times? And I think that for me, it has helped me. For example, I'm grateful that in trying to bridge those generations, that I have a young team. I've always wanted to help prepare others. But this is a time when this young generation is so comfortable with technology. They are so quick. I've even got used to texting one of my millennials sitting on the sofa. Aren't you proud of me? Wow. But still.
And Ms. Cave, I can ask you a question. From we being the two different generations, I thank you for your courageous leadership and making room for the younger generation to even be a part of this and understanding and recognizing their brilliance. Would you see even in the different generations how this can be a problem if there's not room that's being made for the younger generation?
Oh, absolutely. one of the great stories that I have, and put it in the book, is I come from a high work ethic environment. And so the idea is no longer to just work hard. The challenge and the opportunities that I had to open my mind to is that young people also work smart, and
Right.
literally smart. They use smart devices. They find ways to minimize their own stress, and they have then the time. They make that time by using that technology to find things that they like and that they enjoy. And if I look at it through my lens, I only see that they're on the device. And what are they doing? Why aren't they doing something physically that I can see? So courageous leaders have to have a different mindset, not let the stress of your lens, you don't see what they're doing, you don't think that they are maximizing, and they are. You
And
really,
I agree with you 100%. And the idea that it's a shift of the way we see the work being done. And so maybe a way to minimize stress is to create the standard on, I need the report to show so I can know what's being shown, are clear directions, so that both generations can work together.
and as school board members, I have to admit to you, okay, I'm 65 years old. I know I don't look it or anything like that.
Not at all.
Thank you. But I didn't realize Instagram, that Facebook has a new name, Boomer Book. I mean, all of these curves that I have to learn and that could minimize my stress and could maximize my doing other things in terms of content. So school board members, leaders, use this technology. Our children who are at the other end of receiving information, they're kind of looking at us like, what are you waiting for?
Right.
Very comfortable. So I'm grateful in my lens that this was one of the aha moments for me, is technology. I'd like to also transition to what are some of the other areas that can be stressful for us during this time. One of the things about leaders is that people look to us for solutions. People expect of us to be problem solvers. We have to be very careful in our own check and balance of our leadership. And that's to not operate from a point of ego. I believe in servant leadership. So that one of my favorite quotes is, even when you're right, you don't have to be right. You don't have to verbalize it. You don't have to humiliate. You don't have to, go on a tangent.
Right.
If you're right, then you realize that perhaps other minds in the room, other people that you've been virtually connecting with, added value to the decision that is in the best interest of the community.
What I love about your quote, Ms. Kay, that even when you're right, you don't have to be right. That doesn't just go with being in the workforce. That transcends into every relationship that we have. And I think that idea and that thought, that golden swallowism, is needed so much right now in our families.
And so when you look at the ego and how it right now, it's how do I feel important? How do I know that I still have the lead? Sometimes that not having to be so verbal, but actually learning another courageous skill, which is to be an active listener, to be really quiet and still. And as much as your mind races and you want to get to the point, kind of be still and listen. Look around the community. Listen to your teachers. Listen to your superintendent. Listen to your fellow board members. Listen more. And through the collaborative approach, you'll get there.
And there's a wonderful story about listening and actually looking through the lens of someone else. When I grew up as a homeless kid, for those who don't know my story, I first became homeless at the age of 14, eventually with my 9-year-old sister and 2-year-old brother due to domestic violence. And I remember coming off the street and staying with the Kickbush family for a little while. And one day Consuelo says, Roy, let's go grocery shopping. And I said, okay. So we get to the grocery store. And she said, Mijo, get whatever you want. You can have whatever you want. Well, you don't share that with the homeless kid to he can get whatever he wants. So we're going to the store, and I knew exactly what I wanted. I knew that I wanted cookies, my Oreo cookies. I love Oreo cookies. I don't eat as many now because I'm not as young, but I wanted Oreo cookies. So so we go through, I see the Oreo cookies, I put them in my basket, or her basket actually, and we get home, and I put this yellow sticky on the cookies that say Roy's cookies don't eat. And I put them in the cupboard. So I go back to the office, the home office we're working, and I'm working when Miss Kickbush comes in and she says, Roy, can I talk to you? I said, sure. And as we're walking to the kitchen, I saw my cookies on the table, and I knew that every time that we had a mentoring session or a discussion, we would be sitting at the table. There's something about consistency there that we need to touch on. However, so I sit there and I know and I feel that I'm in trouble. So I look down and she says, don't look at me. You're not in trouble. I want to share something with you. So I look up and she says, Roy, in this house, we share. She said, so I'm going to ask if we can remove this sticker so everyone can share, but I make you a promise. After these cookies are done, I will get you more. And so we removed the sticker, we shared the cookies, and it was probably about 2 years later, randomly, we're traveling somewhere in the country. And she says, Roy, can I share a story? And I said, sure. She goes, I want to tell you a story. What I was really thinking, do you remember those cookies, the Oreo cookies? I said, yes, ma'am. She says, well, when I first saw that sticker, my thought was, how ungrateful. He didn't even pay for these cookies. Yeah, I paid for them, and he doesn't want to share. She goes, but then I had to stop myself, and I looked through your lens. Yes. And I thought, these were his favorite cookies. When was the last time he had them? She goes, and it gave me a totally different perspective. And I think as leaders, being courageous leaders, it's being able to look through the lens of those that we serve and not just through our own, because it's looking through their lens where we identify the need that they need. And that's what we're there for, to be visionary, but visionary through their lens.
Thank you, Roy, for sharing that, because we're talking then the importance of relationships. And relationships means that we relate, we are willing to make room, we're willing to not necessarily think in isolation that leaders, we have to have only the answers, but that we can also be learners.
Exactly.
And I think about right now, all of the courageous leaders that are serving meals, that are volunteering.
Right.
I heard from Jamie that over 280,000 meals. Just imagine what a great service. And I hear from many families through different means. I heard from my daughter that one of the lines in San Antonio was 10,000 strong. So think about what we can do as far as the importance of relationships, and relationships has to be more than just the virtual learning, which is what we're coming to.
Right.
There's another delicate area that I wanted to share through Roy's lens. And I thank you, Roy, for your transparency. Lately, we have heard of a rise in domestic violence. We have heard of a rise in child abuse. Our lives have always been about strengthening the home. And I thought about when we were writing, when you were writing particularly about a home is more than four walls, your eyes got watery. You got very emotional. Right. And so this is something that as school board members may say that doesn't fall in our paradigm. These are some of the unexpected realities, and courageous leaders now be thinking about what can we do as we see these things happen in our schools.
I would also push back a little and say it does fall in their paradigm, because if a kid is not being able to perform at its highest, and you have that multiplied by 200 kids, 2,000 kids, that's going to affect the performance of the district.
Right.
And so even now, when we talk about a home is more than four walls, you know, I'm very connected with many of the kids that I've worked with, many of the educators, the superintendents across the nation that I've been able to work with, a little over 650,000 thus far in my career. And I'm hearing things of kids running away during the pandemic because it's so broken inside the home that they would rather be out on the street than face what they're having to face within these walls. So it takes more than four walls to have a home. Just because you have a roof over your head does not mean you have a home. And that's very tough. And then to go back to what you were talking about in the book when we were writing, Ms. Kay, you're right. It was a trigger. It was a trigger, and we were talking about emotional decision making and following that trend of the thread of that decision you made. If you follow that thread, who does it really affect? How many people does it affect? And it can be the same thing as leaders. Every decision we make, it's not just a decision. It's gonna affect someone's life one way or another. And for me, I was so worked up because I was thinking about the times where we were in hiding from my biological father, and all I had was popsicles to eat in the freezer. And so I know that these decisions come from somewhere, because we didn't wake up one day and say, oh, we're going to be homeless. There was a series of decisions that were made that led to my siblings and I becoming homeless. And that's what I was talking about, is we will make decisions, especially in these times, and it's going to affect someone's life. And we have to make strong, courageous decisions. I understand that. And I know that some are it's going to just be whichever is better of the two evils, but we have to try to keep our kids in mind, because every decision we make does have a thread that leads right back to them.
And I remember that as we were looking at a similar scenario, something that would be relevant, realistic, and that you said, oh, I know what I would, I recall in my own personal life. So I hear you saying emotional decision making, and how is that different from other type of decision making? But I love the idea you created the scenario, and I know that it's on the screen, but maybe, Roy, you would like to highlight one of the things that, as you see the days and what is happening.
Well, this is a section from the book on Educate and Empower of the book coming out of 4 Steps not allowing the pandemic to affect your home. And I can just play up this entire scenario. So emotional decision making happens all the time. And most of the time, they aren't very detrimental. However, plenty of decisions can be. If we trace the line of our decisions, who is affected? So let's look at this hypothetical scenario. Chris, his partner Taylor, and their 2 kids, Leroy and Maria, were all in quarantine together. Day 1. Everything seemed normal. Chris and Taylor, they did their usual routine. Chris made breakfast for the family. The kids played in their room, and Taylor worked at home in the home office off the computer. Second day, similar to day 1, other than a few more dirty dishes in the sink, laundry to do, and noise from the restless kids running around, Taylor took her makeshift office to the living room, from the living room to the bedroom for a little more peace and quiet. And I think that we can all understand these, especially now. Day 3, Chris served cereal because the dishes were dirty, and he started to feel unappreciated and wondered why he was the only one doing the cooking. The kids began fighting with each other, and Taylor was frustrated with everyone because they couldn't understand that she was the only breadwinner in the house at that time. Day 4, now the emotional decision making takes place. Chris yells at Taylor, "You don't even help around the house." Taylor yells back, "Help. I'm the only one bringing in money to support this family." In the other room, the kids are fighting too. Leroy's yelling at his sister Maria, which makes her cry. Chris yells, "Screw this," and storms out of the house. Taylor, who is now left carrying the whole load, has to cook, watch the kids, and work to bring in the money. So this is just a hypothetical situation, but I think that we can all find ourselves somewhere in this scenario. But what happens next? What happens next? Because these series led to these emotional decisions, even for Chris to leave the house. When he comes back, this house is no longer a home at that moment.
Right. And so maybe one of the ideas and questions, and besides, I'm going to share 8 strategies for effective communication. But as you look at your counselors and you look at your behavioral specialist, you look at the support team in your school districts, perhaps you can ask the question as a learner. So how are you going to serve our families differently? What kind of services can we do, even if they're virtual? What kind of communication circles can we have so that I heard, for example, that the children asking to see, meaning look at their teachers. They want to see them. They want to see their school board members. They want to see the people that are in their lives. And so this might be an opportunity to get away from what keeping the kids sad, irritable, lonely, isolated. That those are just ideas of courageous leaders to do. My strategy.
Before you jump into those 8 strategies, Ms. K, I think it's being visionary as this courageous leader, that understanding that physical needs are one thing, but emotional needs are just as important.
Absolutely.
And districts like Rialto, and I know that Mr. Ayala is listening in now, and what they're doing for the emotional part for families is just as important.
Right. So that EQ and IQ are on the same platform. Although EQ came along perhaps only about the last 10 years in many, many districts. And a child who has emotional or is wounded, as Dr. Hendershot has shared in our earlier webinar, is not to be taken lightly. It is to be considered. So again, we're just offering to you, our beloved school board members, what we hear, the eyes and the ears on the streets, having been in so many districts. So that these 8 strategies is what I share when we work with families. One is to communicate with love. There was a time when the blessing came. You got married, you had this child, whether you adopted it or in our case, we've made room for many children to live in our family.
We can barely hear you, Ms. K. I just want to put that out there just as you're speaking.
It's about communicating with love. Think about the moment that you had this child. What were you thinking? What were you feeling? When you brought this person in your life, whoever it is, think about going there with that mindset, not with the moment in which you are angry and upset and what I call the emotional scorecard. 2, speak with a soft voice. Yelling is not going to make it any better.
Right.
I say that's always the wrong approach. Make eye contact. I know that as Latinos, sometimes that is a difficult behavior because we take looking at somebody as being disrespectful. But I would add to that, also get down to the height level of the child you are trying to connect with. So beyond just the eye contact. 4, respect each other. We can even agree to disagree. That always diffuses the having to be right. The 5th is don't look for the blame, because if you are, you're going to find something. Look for peace, look for resolution, look for collaboration, look for compromise. 6, give each other time to speak. When people are yelling and pointing and we get lost in all of that noise.
And one thing you taught me, Ms. K, was you always do this.
Oh.
When you want to listen, an easy tip is just put your 2 fingers over your mouth when you're allowing the other person to speak, so that you're reminding yourself it's not my turn.
Right. Now I have to tell you that I always say, how many of you know someone who always finishes what you're trying to say? And every time, people raise their hand and I go, isn't it annoying? And everybody agrees. And then I say, I'm one of those. So, I say,
I just finished yours.
I say with love and humor. So for me, it's cállate chelo. It's not your turn. 7, try to be consistent. Be as consistent because children will adapt. They love structure. They love to see that what was on Monday will happen. As school board members, be consistent in what you decide in your meeting and what the public then learns about how you all came to this consensus. And last is to walk in someone else's shoes. This is where I especially am fond of the lesson that I learned during this moment about generational differences. And I know that later we'll show a funny video, but it's very appropriate for my own aha moment. I also had a friend of mine that shared with me, and it's part of my education and empowerment, and that is to be still. I've had to learn to be still and to really look and reflect on what I'm learning. So I think about the last step that I would love for Roy to talk about is, yes, we're still learning, we're educating ourselves, but now the courageous leadership step is how do we empower others?
Well, I think that it's a beautiful, you referenced their work earlier, Ms. Kay. Mr. and Mrs. Hendershot, Dr. Joe Hendershot and his wife, Darty, they have a book called Supporting the Wounded Educator. And she has a quote in there that I think is just powerful. And it says, "It doesn't concern me if what I do raises the eyebrows of a few. I'm concerned if what I do makes a difference." And I think that's what courageous leadership is what we're doing, creating a difference. And that goes right back to everything we've been saying on creating a legacy, not just leaving a legacy, but as you say, living a legacy. We don't have to just leave it, we can live it now.
One of the ideas about school board members, and I hope that this is something that maybe Jamie can incorporate in one of their future webinars, is when a crisis like this comes, let us not have to reinvent the wheel. How do we, as school board members, share what some of the challenges were? What were some of the solutions? What did it take to go from the stress to finding joy in doing things quickly under time constraints, so that in that webinar, you're empowering each other. There might be a new school board member that has just stepped into their role. So how do we take this gift of having been together, just like many other crises in our lives, or perhaps before ourselves, whether it's 9/11. As a veteran, I know that my brother is defined by the Vietnam experience. My sister's defined by the Desert Storm experience. This pandemic is going to define you as a school board members as a period in time that we will never forget. But how do we maximize this opportunity to educate and to empower?
And I completely agree with you, Ms. Kay. I think every person is going to say, where were you in quarantine? That's what it's going to become. Everyone, these moments are forever embedded into our minds. So where did you spend your quarantine? Where were you?
Right. So that one of my other Consueloisms is, let us not compete.
Yeah.
But seek to understand each other's differences. This is not about which school district did it quicker, faster, better. This is about all our children. Us set aside. I'm not trying to get political, but I listened to Governor Cuomo from New York, who said this is not the time to fight, to be right, to engage in negative behavior. This is a time for us to leverage our talents, to be vulnerable, to ask of ourselves, how can I share with my fellow board member my fellow district that might be more than maybe or less than a mile? How do I step outside of that traditional role? And again, I like to just add that one of the biggest differences that turned out to be a very positive difference is the generational differences. So we wanted to show you this video. I hope you like it.
Did I get the job?
Absolutely not.
Why not?
Because you're a baby boomer and I'm a millennial.
Well, Melanie, I am overqualified for this job.
I don't know where you got this. We don't do paper applications.
I made it. I don't do the internet.
Okay, that is the third time you have said that this interview, and it also says so on this homemade job application.
There you go, champ.
I don't know what this is for.
Don't you need a trophy anytime you anything?
Oh, it's on. How'd you get here? Horse?
I drove my car. I own it. After 8 more payments. How'd you get here?
I took an Uber.
Do not know what that is. I bet you're a vegan.
Yeah, because I'm not a monster. Your generation is afraid of black people.
Your generation thinks you are black people.
Oh, word. Look at who you guys voted for.
Yeah, that's right. I voted.
Touche.
This is the only way you'll ever own a house.
Learning how to text is the only way you'll ever communicate with your son. So,
All right, guys, who took my Sheryl Crow album?
Gen X. You know what? You're hired.
I quit.
Dad?
Did I?
You know, and we could have probably shown the other video, which shows the other side, right? But, you know, the idea here is courageous leaders identify the issues long before they become the long-term problems. So this virtual world that we have entered is the millennial Gen X world. It is where they are going to rise and shine. It is where they're going to remind us of what they can do. And here's the next generation, and I don't know what names they have. Somebody said A, B, Z, whatever. This next generation, which is the children that we're teaching now, are going to be even more advanced and more comfortable. And so for us as the school board members, and not saying that we're old and we're no longer viable, we are more so than ever. But here it is. The issue then is, how do we take these generations, knowing now that the paradigm and culture now is a virtual culture? And
Right.
how do we look for the solutions and means to adapt so that as courageous leaders, we're not just, that reminds me of a quick story I just want to share with you. I was given an assignment as a young officer. At the time, I was considered an expert in information systems, interoperability of computer systems. And, you know, I went out to do my job and I was called in. And they said, well, you're going to be teaching classes on fundamental computer skills. Fundamental computer skills. I went off to do my lesson plans. I had all of the things I needed. And then the senior officer said to me, however, for anyone above this rank, meaning anyone above 50, you are to teach them individually. And I thought, what a waste of time. Why can't we just accept that there's a learning curve? I'll be able. Here was the bottom line. When I spoke to these senior leaders privately as to why that decision was made, they were very candid. They said, one, we're afraid of technology. We have built an image of courage, and now this little box is going to make us look stupid. It's going to make us look like we're slow. We can't act quickly. So no, I am not going to show that insecurity to my fellow general officer, to my fellow colonel. So you're going to help me here in my office before I go out and learn in a greater audience. And that really puzzled me, and it brought me to think that courageous leaders now is about learning quickly, learning from others, being okay that while we have wisdom, we may have influence, we may have the economic means, that we're, again, going back to everyone has values, that this wonderful generation can even get us further along to do things quicker and smarter. So I just wanted to share that story because it stayed with me all these years about image, about ego, about insecurities. Courageous leaders face it with dignity.
And I think going back to your courageous leadership, ma'am, one of my favorite stories that I heard you speak one time was when you first became an officer. For those who don't know Ms. Kickbush, she is the highest ranking Latina woman in the combat support for the United States Army, first woman commissioned officer in the state of Texas. And there's one story where she talks about where you were in front of your first group of men, all men, and they said to you, "You're in charge." Can you tell me that story?
Well, I was 22 years old, so we're talking about almost a 42-year-old story. But at 22 years old, I had read all about leadership. I had the title. I'm standing in one of my 3 units that were all men at the time, 68 men. If you're a veteran, then you would know what a platoon means. It's a group of soldiers brought into a group, and there's 2 people who stand outside of that group. One is the platoon sergeant, that is the enlisted leader, and then 2 feet further in front is the officer who is now commanding this group of soldiers. I was 22. In front of me was a 47-year-old, 6'3", as he used the words, a black man from the backwoods of Georgia, 3-time Vietnam veteran. And at the time, the command from him was, "Ma'am, the unit is ready." I didn't know what to do. I panicked. I went back immediately to my lesson that I was in charge. So I turned around and I said to Sergeant First Class Tate, may he rest in peace, "I'm a leader, and my first order, I can give orders. My first order is you're in charge." And thank goodness there was no YouTube or AHA or Snapchat or any of those things. Can you imagine what a video like that would have looked? And he just leaned down very graciously and he said, "Lieutenant, you keep that attitude. You're going to make it. Who knows? One day you might just get to become a colonel or a general." And that was a moment of knowledge, of wisdom from that man through his generation, 47 years old, tried during the most challenging, which is a combat duty, not once, but 3 times. But the fact that he was still respectful, that he was still, and that I was willing to learn. I was able to serve with him 2 more assignments. And yes, I give him credit to the fact that I became a company commander. He knew there were some issues I had.
Right.
whether it was gender, color, or lack of experience.
The reason
But-
I think that's such a brilliant story, especially for a time now, even for our leaders who are leading school districts, is even as a leader, you understood I may not have had all the knowledge, all the wisdom, and you were able to leverage that, as we talked about leveraging your talent throughout this webinar and the last webinar. And the fact that when he said, man, the unit is ready, I feel like even in today's world, change is here. We can't wait for change to happen. It's here. It's ready. And so it's up to us to keep the right attitude, as he shared with you. If you keep that attitude, you're going to make it. And it's the same rings true for us as leaders. If we keep that attitude, if we keep the right attitude, we're going to make it. But that's by leveraging from generation to generation. That's from leveraging from our wisdom. That's from leveraging and seeing, being humble enough to see everyone else's talents around us, using our own talents. I think that's just a beautiful story that leads right into where we are today in this world.
And so that we are now given the opportunity with this pandemic, I said it in the acknowledgments, you didn't win.
Right.
You didn't break us.
Right.
I'm willing to acknowledge some things. You brought us closer.
That's right.
You made us think deeper. You made us stronger.
But they did not write our ending. We write that ending.
We are the authors of how we defined what happened, what we learned from it, and what we go on to do, because as long as there is life, we're going to continue to lead this nation. To you, the school board members, and to any of our other beloved listeners, leadership is complex. Leadership is about inspiring. It's about motivating. It's about thinking ahead. So as the school board members, think about your next meeting. Maybe start with a prayer, start with a reflection, start with a lesson learned, and then share it. Share it with perhaps the newly elected person. Work with your superintendents. Let's not forget our teachers, our staff, our people who are preparing the meals, our bus drivers that are delivering these meals, our office who are having to answer the question that so many want to know, when will school start again? And they would, they're going to answer it 50 times a day, graciously, knowing that that phone call is the first phone call, although it might be the 50th. You are the first responders as well. To our school nurses, that, some schools have one nurse and they're perhaps being asked so many questions. To the librarians who are now having to come up with more ways to virtually connect, so our children are reading, they're becoming literate or even more literate. I think of our custodians, that they also are thinking, when will I come back? As much as they probably are okay with not having all the noise, and not that, I'm sure that they are thinking about the kids that they're used to seeing in the morning, the teachers that they say hello to our principals, who the world expects so much from, that this is your moment to also know you're human. So
Exactly.
in recapping home, I just want to bring us back to the basics. And Roy, what would you like to share about getting back to the basics?
I'm getting back to the basics. I do, before we touch on that, I do want to give a major shout out to our teachers, because even online, they've been receiving a lot of negative comments of not being prepared and not ready. These times were not known to any of us. And just as they are learning, as we're learning, they also have families. They also have loved ones who are sick. They are also dealing with everything we're dealing with, on top of trying to be there for you as well. So a big shout out to the teachers, and thank you so much for all your hard work that you're putting into this. But getting back to the basics, would be remembering who we are, what we stand for, and where we want to go in life. When I had to, in my own personal life, have to get back to the basics, for me, I sat down and I wrote out my core values. I had to go back to my core values in order to pull back into who I wanted to be. And I looked at my core values, I evaluated them to make sure that's who I was going to be. And I applied them. And in those basics was humanity, was staying human, was making sure that I was there for my siblings, for my family, for my community. All of that was encompassed. And that's part of getting back to the basics for me, is staying true to who I want to be, even in adversity.
For me, it's I love our second area. We talk about being okay. It's going to be okay. It's not going to be the same, granted.
Right.
People talk about the new normal. People talk about Mother Nature giving us a timeout. But I look at it as another kind of an opportunity. It's going to be okay. We certainly mourn the loss of our 20-some thousand fellow Americans and the thousands and thousands of our brothers and sisters around the world. But what are we going to do to get beyond this and to learn from it, rise above it? So again, we will get back to school.
Right.
We will be going back to eat, and it will change us, no doubt about it. But let us not give up on the idea and the mindset that it's going to be okay.
And I think going on to reflect one more time on our M from home. So we have humility, it's going to be okay, and maximize stress and minimize joy. I think this is so important, especially when all of us are dealing with some sort of cabin fever, of being cooped up, of being in situations that we're not used to being, or being around people as much as we're have to be. There was a story where my operations manager, who I do say a prayer for right now because I know that she's watching, but she has a temperature of 102.5. And so she's concerned because she has a baby Nova, that she cares for. And so she doesn't know whether she has the virus or not. And so we're keeping her in our prayers. Reggie, if you're listening, thank you for listening. But minimizing stress and maximizing joy is coming back to the basics and trying to find joy in these times. And it's different for everyone. I know that in the ebook that we have a whole page of things that you can do, but even it's taking a time out. I think that overall Mother Nature has put us in a timeout, and lessons to be learned during this time. And I think that if we can learn some of these lessons on how to minimize our stress, we can actually live life and not just exist in this life. It's not about going to work so that you can be at work 9 hours a day so you can enjoy the 2 hours at home. It's about how can I make the best of my time to live this life, because on average, I'm not sure if you know this, but on average, as an American in the United States, we our life expectancy is 77.6 on average, which means we only have 77 Christmas mornings, 77 summer breaks, 77 Thanksgiving dinners. I'm about to be 40. That means 40 of them are gone. And that really puts life into perspective. Do I want to spend all my time chasing something, or do I want to minimize that stress so I can maximize the joy of seeing the memories I make with my brothers and sisters, with my parents, with those that I love? There's a picture that I posted, Miss Kay, on Facebook, and those who follow me probably have seen it, where I started jumping on the couch. And I had said to my baby brother, baby Ray, who's now taller than me, he's 25. And I said, come jump on the couch with me. And he said, why? I said, get up here and jump on the couch. And I grabbed his hand as he was like that little boy when he was 2. And I said, when was the last time you jumped on the couch? And while it doesn't make sense to jump on the couch, you're supposed to sit, don't lose that joy. And so he's jumping on this couch with me, and you can see him laughing because we're 2 adult grown men jumping on a couch. But for me, it was a 2-year-old little brother.
Right.
We lost a lot of our childhood to homelessness. But I don't have to not stop jumping on a couch and lose that moment with him because he's no longer 2. But I can still create that moment with him as a 40-year-old. We have to maximize the joy because we don't know if we're going to be here tomorrow.
Well,
we don't know how much longer we have.
Well,
Maximize joy now by minimizing the stress that's in your life.
And now I understand why you didn't ask me to jump on the sofa. I get it. I forgive you. We would have been buying a new sofa, but it's okay. I did watch you all act like you were 2, and that brought joy. So that the last chapter, and then we only have a few minutes left, is I heard Roy's tears through his voice, and that empowers me to think about, what will I jump on? What will I think is joyful for me? What will I do to share with my next generation and the next generation, having children and grandchildren? So school board members, it is always an honor and a blessing to have this dialogue. To our other listeners from California, from Florida, to our parents who are so gracious and wanted to join us, teachers, everyone, the community. Thank you, Masba. Thank you for allowing us to share what we've had to experience real time, real life. Thank you for supporting us in this crazy ebook we did as a way to earn our life by doing something honorable. And yes, one last idea about joy is we're always used to giving our kids time out. Well, maybe draw up a timeout and give it to your kids when they see that you are stressed, and they can say, well, you need a timeout.
Yeah.
You know that Cynthia Rocha has a sign with her children that says to them, somebody's getting a little too excited. So just think about joy. Think about the fact that you're okay.
Yeah, back to the basics.
Yes. So thank you again, Masba. We look forward to hearing from you. If you feel that you want to continue some of this dialogue or some of these ideas on leadership, we'll be happy to come back. But again, it's been our honor and our blessing. We pray for you, for your loved ones. And if you've lost someone, like we have now are aware of someone in our inner circle, we send prayers of comfort and strength. Please don't forget courageous leadership. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be right. Don't look for the blame. Remember that we're all in this together. And yes, pandemic, you didn't win. We get to write the last chapter. Thank you. Blessings.
Consuelo and Roy, one word for the 2 of you, gracias. Ustedes son fenomenales. We love, I could sit at your feet and listen to you all day long. Love the Nopalitos acronym, right? When we talk about culturally relevant learning, thank you for taking an element from our culture like nopalitos, like the cactus that we eat, and turning that into something that we can use in our daily lives. I just love that there are so many quotes that I've been writing down here. You know, for instance, that quote, even when you're right, you don't have to be right. There are so many times, there are so many pearls of wisdom that the 2 of you had shared with us today that I just, on behalf of all who are listening today and all who will log in and listen to us later, just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you to you both. I just want to give one moment to be able to promote. So Educational Achievement Services, we can find you online. I'm going to say it, easleadership.com. Again, that's easleadership.com. And Impact Truth, I'm understanding, Roy, that we can find you online at homelessbychoice.com as well, correct?
Correct.
Awesome. We see the ebook there coming soon. We're hearing that it may be out as soon as this week.
That's right.
Awesome. So we're looking forward to that. We want to remind all of our listeners that next Wednesday, April the 22nd, we'll be here again, this time with Remy Castillo, talking about what's possible. Remy has had to reinvent his life since the beginning of this pandemic. So I suspect that these are going to be very much words and stories of hope for all of us on what's possible. Remy Castillo next Wednesday. And then the following Wednesday, we'll have with us Marisa Rivera, one of the keynotes at our MASBA conference, speaking on leadership as well. Consuelo and Roy, thank you both for being keynotes at our MASBA conference in February. All were tremendous, and thank you for your time here today. We look forward to a long, long relationship with you both, and we wish you both well.
Adios.
Thank you both. Have a great day.
Adios.